The Oberon class would be the penultimate diesel boat that Britain would build, with the Upholder class being the last. They were designed and were based off the preceding Porpoise class SSKs, and the Oberons would try to become more stealthy and stronger, and which they would actually become. They'd be ordered in the mid-1950s, with work starting in 1957 to construct 27 vessels being built at 4 yards, 4 at Kemmel Laird, 6 at Chatham, 11 at Scott's Shipbuilding & Co, and 6 by Vickers Armstrong. 13 would be built for the British Royal Navy, 6 for the Royal Australian Navy, 3 for the Brazilian Navy, 3 for the Royal Canadian Navy, and finally 2 for Chile. The Royal Navy vessels would be known as HMS Oberon, Ocelot, Olympus, Onslaught, Onyx, Opportune, Opossum, Oracle, Orpheus, Osiris, Otter, and Otis. The Royal Australian Navy vessels would be known as HMAS Onslow, Orion, Otama, Otway, Ovens, and Oxley. The Brazilian vessels would be called Humaeter, Riachuelo, and Tonelero. I think that's how Google Translate says. I'm going with that. The Royal Canadian vessels would be known as HMCS Onijabwa, Okanagan, and Onondaga. And finally, after my butchering of Google Translate, the Chilean vessels would be known as the Oberon and Hyatt. So, these boats would be 90 metres long, a beam of 8.1 metres, and have a draft of 5.5 metres, as well as displacing 2,030 tonnes on the surface and 2,410 tonnes submerged. Their power plant would consist of 2 1,840 horsepower V16 diesel engines, 2 1,280 kilowatt generators, and 2 3,000 horsepower electric motors for the underwater cruising portion of their role. They would carry 2 batteries of 224 2-volt cell batteries, and these were carried forward and just behind the accommodation section. And these would produce about 440 volts of output for an endurance of around about 5 hours. Now, this power plant overall would drive 2 shafts for a maximum speed of 12 knots on the surface and 17 knots submerged, on par with most World War II era submarines. The range would be 10,350 nautical miles, which is from HMS Dolphin, which is now Fort Blockhouse in Portsmouth, to just off Soverodinsk and Archangel in the White Sea, with about 8,000 nautical miles left in the tanks, which is quite impressive. However, like most diesel-electric boats, these vessels would have a snorkel, so they could use their diesel at quote-unquote periscope depth for greater speed. Impressively, the submarines had a test depth of 200 metres, which was very good at the time, some 100 metres off the test depths of some modern-day submarines today. However, one of the class would push it to about 300 odd metres, which is quite strong, surprisingly enough. Now, the crew complements of these boats would be 62 ratings and 7 officers. However, there would only be enough beds for about half, maybe a third of the crew. So they would do something called hot bunking, where one guy would get out and another would jump straight in. It's a bit minging, not gonna lie, but at least the bed's still warm. The vessel would be designed and fitted with the following sensor fits: a single 1002 India band navigational radar with a range of about 25 nautical miles, which is the third from the right, a Type 187 active and passive attack sonar, a Type 2007 long-range passive sonar, and either a UAL or UA4 passive receiver for radar detection, or, easier terms, ESM. The weapons fit would be as follows: 6 21-inch torpedo tubes up forward, and 2 short 21-inch torpedo tubes down aft. Usual complement was about 20 torpedoes overall, 4 aft with 2 loaded already, and 16 forward. Enough for roughly 2 reloads on each tube. The torpedoes carried would either be the Mark 24 Tigerfish in the later operational roles of these vessels, or the Mark 8s. The stern tubes would be loaded with the Mark 20s. However, to spice it up a bit, these vessels would ditch their torpedo stocks sometimes for no less than 50 mines. Possibly not massive mines, but nevertheless, that's a lot of, quote unquote, sea mine. If you get that reference, kudos. The British vessels' careers would be starting off with the Orpheus, who would be commissioned in 1960, followed by Oberon in 1961. Last of the class was Onyx, which was commissioned in 1967. These vessels would be used in their quote-unquote attack role because they were very, very quiet. However, they weren't actually ever used as an attack submarine. If they did, however, the Cold War would have got very hot and we wouldn't be here by that point. But they were used to patrol the Greenland, Iceland and UK gap, as well as patrol the SOSIS lines. As they were the quietest subs at the time, they were used very well. Now, most of the missions these vessels would undertake are still locked away, so one can only imagine what they did. But Onyx would be used as the only boat of its kind to actually see real service, as she would land SPS operatives on the Falkland Islands during the 1982 Falklands War. However, she would end up hitting an undetected underwater reef, which became very detected when she slammed into it. She would have to return home to the United Kingdom under escort at 5 knots because she had damaged 2 of her torpedo tubes, one of which had a live tigerfish in it, which was trapped. It, however, was removed when she got back to Portsmouth, and thus the longevity of the boat would continue. Now, Onyx and her class would be decommissioned and scrapped, or a couple would be preserved by the end of the 1990s, being replaced by the Upholder class SSKs, who wouldn't actually stay around for much time. The Royal Canadian vessels would have a quiet career, with the vessels being rotated through being used as to train surface vessels in anti-submarine warfare. By the 1970s, these boats were getting outdated and obsolete due to the progression of time, technology, and the advancement of nuclear-powered submarines in other navies. So the Canadians bought in SOUP, the Submarine Operational Update Program, which was designed to try and bring these boats into the operational role, instead of the training role they were in after commissioning. They would be quote-unquote midlife refits to install new sonar, radar, passive electronic equipment, combat systems, as well as the use of the Mark 48 torpedo, which would come slightly later on. Now, this kept the boats alive until the end of the 1990s, like the British boats, but they'd actually be replaced by the British Upholder class, which Britain had actually sold them because 1, they wanted a full nuclear-powered fleet, and 2, they weren't that great. Anyway, they're now called the Victoria class. Now, interestingly enough, the Canadians gained 2 more Oberon class vessels, the Olympus and the Osiris. However, Olympus was used as a stationary training vessel in Halifax, and Osiris was broken up and cannibalized for spare parts, with some 20,050 parts being sent over to Canada. Now, 2 ships are in the process of being preserved, or have actually been preserved, with the rest of the class being scrapped. The Chilean or Chilean vessels, depending however which way you want to say it and which other way is technically correct, would operate until New Year's Eve of 2001. Now, I did some digging here, and I literally couldn't find anything on these vessels. The only things I could actually find were O'Brien is now a museum ship, and the Hayat was scrapped, and that's literally all I could find. If anyone knows exactly where you can find the service careers of these vessels, especially the Chilean and the Brazilian vessels, please let me know in the comment section, because I couldn't find anything. The Royal Australian vessels will conduct themselves in the Pacific Ocean in multiple multinational exercises like RIMPAC, as well as some of the boats being deployed as part of the ANZ UK force in Singapore, where they would operate with British forces in the area. Like the Canadian vessels, the Aussie vessels would have midlife refits, and the capability to fire the Mark 48 torpedo was added. It was found that because of the class was very, very quiet, they were able to quote-unquote, for exercise, sink many American carriers in exercises, which is no mean feat. It's not just a Type 209 class boat that can actually sink one. Even these things can do it. But by 1987, a replacement for the class was in the works, and so they would all be decommissioned by the end of the 1990s, being replaced by the Collins class. Now, 3 of the class were preserved completely, with parts of the rest being saved and put on show to the rest of the public. And now finally, the Brazilian vessels. Now, like the Chilean vessels, there was literally nothing I could find on these vessels. The only things I found was the Tonelero sank at a moorings in 2000, the Riachuelo is a museum ship, and the Jumeirah left service in 1996, possibly being scrapped alongside the Tonelero in 2004. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so that's the end of that video. Hopefully you learned something new, because I most certainly did. Now, if you want to go and support the channel, there is a link in the description below to the Patreon page. I would recommend doing it, but it's up to you. Also, if you want to come and talk to me, there's a link in the description for the Discord channel. There's a couple of good guys over there. We talk about a wide variety of stuff. So yeah, so thanks for watching, guys. Hit that notification button to stay up to date with what I'm uploading. And obviously give it a like, give it a subscribe if you really want to, and comments always good. I like reading your comments. So take care. Catch you next time.